My son and his wife invited me to their villa in Florida. They smiled, said it was family, then vanished for days. I thought I was trusted. But trust can be a mask. One morning while tidying the linen cupboard, my hand brushed cold metal. A safe, its latch imperfect, left unlocked. Inside were letters never meant for me. And in those letters, I was not Catherine Moore. I was leverage. I knelt on the cold tile, my pulse echoing in my ears. The latch gave too easily, as if Elena had shut it in haste before leaving. Inside, no jewelry, no cash, only a thick stack of letters bound with a tired rubber band. My fingers trembled as I lifted the first. It was not their letter. It was mine. A letter I had written decades ago to my late husband Robert after his surgery, folded and stained with time. I never knew how Elena had gotten it. But her handwriting in the margins turned my stomach. Catherine responds to grief about Robert. My most private heartbreak annotated like data in her careful script. I pressed the paper to my chest. For a moment, the villa around me disappeared. I was back in that hospital room, whispering to Robert that I would hold the family together. Now those vows had been stolen and turned into leverage. Another envelope revealed a draft of a power of attorney. My name appeared at the top, granting authority to transfer or sell. The signature at the bottom was mine or almost mine. Smooth, perfect, too perfect. The kind of forgery only an expert could create. I thought of my years as a nurse, signing countless charts under pressure. I knew my shaky loops the tug of arthritis in my wrist. This signature was not flawed. That falseness screamed the truth someone had practiced until my name bent to their will. The third envelope was worse. A memo between Elena and a man I recognized from whispered conversations, Dr. Vincent Hale. The words were precise, clinical. The aging mother is a liability. Use her presence as emotional leverage. Reframe her down payment as a gift. Position housing as care and cost. In the margin, Elena's handwriting again. Nathan will comply if framed as stability for children. I sat very still, letters spread before me like scalpels. My chipped teacup waited on the counter, the crack in its glaze shining under the kitchen light. It looked like a bruise against the marble, a witness to betrayal. Silence pressed in around me, heavy and accusing. For years, I had believed silence meant safety. Now I understood silence was their weapon, and my disappearance their goal. I whispered into the empty villa. Not this time. Now let me tell you what happened next. The air inside that villa was so clean, it felt scrubbed of life. The walls were painted the color of bleached bone, the floors polished stone. Everything sparkled, but none of it belonged to me. I had only brought one thing that felt real, my chipped teacup, the one my husband and I used every morning before his heart gave out one winter. I set it in their gleaming kitchen as a reminder that I was still here. Not invisible, not disposable. And yet those letters told me otherwise. In them, my daughter-in-law, Elena Elegant, linen dresses, careful smiles, wrote to a man named Dr. Vincent Hale, her financial advisor. Their words cut me into categories: the aging mother, the silent liability, the emotional lever. I sat back on the cold tile floor, letters spread out like evidence around me. And in that stillness, I remembered another kind of silence those long nights in the hospital, when I held the hand of a patient who would not live until morning. I knew then that silence could either heal or destroy. And at this moment, silence was destroying me. But let me take you to the beginning, to the moment I first crossed the threshold of that villa. Nathan, my only son, had smiled warmly, keys in hand, saying, "Mom, this place has plenty of room. You'll have privacy. The kids will love having you here." Elena stood beside him, her smile frozen just beneath her skin. She placed a bottle of white wine on the counter with a neat note in her elegant script. "For your quiet evenings." "Thank you for everything, Catherine. I should have felt grateful." Instead, something in me recoiled. The villa looked more like a showroom than a home, every book arranged by color, every towel folded with military precision. No photographs, no softness. Even the air smelled curated, a mixture of eucalyptus and lemon. The day they left for their sudden trip, they hugged me stiffly, loaded their suitcases into the car, and waved as if I were the babysitter of their estate. Their words lingered. "We trust you." But I learned trust can sometimes mean the opposite. It can mean test. That first night alone, I brewed tea in my chipped cup, sat by the window, and tried to convince myself I belonged. But the silence in that villa was different. It did not comfort. It accused. It felt like the walls themselves were watching. And then the safe. The small door left ajar, a metal mouth holding secrets. I never meant to look inside. But when something is left open, almost beckoning, curiosity is not a sin. It is survival. The letters told me more than I wanted to know. They spoke of property transfers, of power of attorney forged in my name, of plans to sell the villa behind Nathan's back. Plans built on the idea that I would stay silent. I pressed the paper to my chest, the ink smudging slightly under my fingers. My heart pounded not with fear, but with recognition. For the first time in years, I saw clearly. They did not invite me to live with them out of kindness. They invited me to play a role. The silent matriarch, grateful, obedient, blind. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the pile, and whispered into the empty villa. Not this time. The chipped teacup sat on the counter, a small rebellion against their world of glass and chrome. I poured another cup, steadying my breath. Somewhere beyond the walls, the ocean carried its eternal rhythm. Inside the villa carried another rhythm, the sound of betrayal pulsing quietly until it could no longer be ignored. And that is how my story truly began. I was 69 when the villa taught me the difference between being housed and being welcomed. I am a widow. The word still stings when I say it. For 40 years, I worked as a nurse at a small hospital in Central Florida. I learned to read pain the way other people read weather. A hand gripping a sheet, a breath held too long. After my husband's heart failed one mild winter, the home we built went quiet. I kept his toolbox under the sink and his coffee mug on the shelf. Grief turned the familiar into a museum. I dusted rooms as if they belonged to history. Nathan is my only child. He arrived late and bright, a fretful boy who loved maps and clean sneakers. He became a man who prefers schedules and polished surfaces. The day he handed me the villa keys, his voice was warm, yet his eyes moved like a supervisor. He said there was plenty of space. I would have privacy. The grandchildren would be thrilled to see me. He meant well, or he wanted to mean well. Those are not the same. When Nathan tries to love, he builds a plan, and sometimes the plan replaces the person. Elena is my daughter-in-law. She is elegant the way a catalog is elegant. Linen in pale shades, sandals that never scuff. She is the kind of tidy that edits people as easily as rooms. Her smile sits perfectly on her face. It never quite reaches her eyes. She placed a bottle of white wine in my hands and thanked me for everything. I wanted to ask what everything meant, but I said thank you. Nurses are trained to be polite under pressure. The villa perched above a narrow strip of water, white walls and pale stone, glass that looked costly to even touch. The kitchen island matched the floor, so light slid across the room and made my body feel heavier. A diffuser hummed, sending eucalyptus into the air like a hospital trying to smell like a spa. Books were arranged by color, not by the fingerprints of readers. No family photographs. No bowl-catching keys by the door. No soft chair with an honest sag where someone had fallen asleep reading. I tried to set something human inside it. I placed my chipped teacup by the sink. The crack in the glaze runs down like a thin lightning bolt. In that kitchen of chrome and stone, the cup looked like a bruise on marble. It belonged to my mornings with my husband and quiet arguments over crossword clues. In the villa, it looked like a beggar among diplomats. Still, I kept it where I could see it. I needed a witness that had survived time and grief. During the first days, I watered Elena's orchids with the care I once gave IV drips. I folded towels in thirds because she favors thirds. People like Elena hold opinions about the direction of fibers. I lined up the shoes so the soles kiss the baseboard. I told myself that kindness is not servitude if you choose it. Then I heard the quiet ways a house speaks. Doors drifted shut behind me. Motion lights woke when I crossed a hall as if to say, I see you. Remain useful. When Elena smiles at me, I feel grated. It is not anger. Anger would warm her. It is appraisal. She notices whether I use fancy napkins or the regular ones. She remarks on how I fold t-shirts. She never raises her voice. She lowers my space. Beside Nathan, she completes a brochure-ready picture. Beside them, I feel like an annotation. The day they left for their sudden trip, her smile was polished. His was tired. Their car faded into the afternoon like a door closing down the block. If you have ever walked into a room that was cleaned too hard, you know the chill. I crossed the threshold and felt it rise around me like thin water. The villa was beautiful. Beauty was not the problem. The problem was beauty used as a shield. I brewed tea and carried it to the window. The cup warmed my fingers. The ocean lay like a slate line under a high sky. I tried to believe this arrangement was about family. I tried to believe gratitude could turn a showroom into a home. Grief makes you tidy. It tells you that if you stack your days in neat piles, chaos will forget your name. I stacked mine with chores and slow walks behind the villa. I listened to old voicemails from the grandchildren until the phone felt warm. I told myself I would be a guest who left no trace. Then I remembered I am not a guest in my own story. I am a mother who kept a unit together in bad seasons. I am a woman who knows the difference between a kindness and a test. I watched and I listened. Elena labeled pantry jars with the precision of a lab. Nathan checked the thermostat twice before bed, as if comfort were a number he could trap. They offered thanks instead of conversation. I placed my teacup in the same circle of light each morning and waited for warmth to become welcome. It did not. It marked where I stood. Standing there, I knew the smiling order of the villa could not tell me who I was. It could truly tell me what I was to them. The villa had a garden designed more for photographs than for living. Beds of orchids stood in neat rows, their roots tucked into glass pots, each bloom pale and stiff. The grass looked cut with military care, no stray blade daring to wander. When Nathan and Elena left, they reminded me to water the orchids lightly, not too much, not too little. Their voices echoed in my head each morning as I carried a small can to the patio, tilting it gently the way I once tilted IV bags in the ward. I tried to care for the house as if it were my own, but the house resisted me. When I reached into the linen closet, every towel smelled faintly of lavender folded into perfect rectangles. I laid my hand on the stacks, remembering the towel cupboards of my old home. There, Towels were a mix of sizes, some faded, some still thick, the corners softened by years. Here, everything looked untouched, as though no child had ever wrapped up after a swim, no man had ever reached for a cloth with wet hands. At the dining table, I spread one of Elena's tablecloths. The fabric was crisp, embroidered with a pattern that meant nothing to me. I smoothed the corners with my palm the way I once smoothed wrinkled bedsheets under a patient. I remembered my husband Robert sitting at our modest table reading the newspaper glasses sliding down his nose. He used to hum when the coffee was strong. In the villa, when I sat down to eat toast alone, the silence hummed instead. The cupboards held rows of crystal glasses lined up like recruits. I lifted one, and it chimed softly against its neighbor. My fingers traced the rim so thin it felt like air. I thought of the thick ceramic mugs Robert favored, the ones that could survive a fall to the floor. I thought of how every Sunday we would eat scrambled eggs by the window, him with his mug, me with my chipped teacup. Those breakfasts were plain but alive. This villa had fine crystal but no breath in the room. I began to fill my afternoons with small chores. I swept the patio, polished silverware, rearranged the pantry jars so the labels faced out because Elena would notice if they didn't. Each act felt less like living and more like rehearsing someone else's script. Even the scent of the diffuser eucalyptus and lemon pressed into me like a uniform I hadn't chosen. Sometimes I found myself standing at the threshold between kitchen and living room, unsure if I was allowed to sit down. It is a strange thing to live inside walls where every surface insists on control. I began to walk outside more often just to breathe air that hadn't been filtered by someone else's taste. That is how I met George. He lived next door, a weathered man in his 70s, his back curved but not broken. His yard was cluttered in the way a yard ought to be: tools leaning against the fence, a boat trailer rusting in the grass. He was a retired sailor, I learned, who had worked cargo routes up and down the coast. His voice carried the sea in it, gravelly patient. The first time he saw me, I was kneeling in the flower bed, brushing soil from my gloves. He leaned on the fence and said, "You're new to this place." I smiled, adjusting my hat. Not new, just visiting. My son and his wife asked me to watch the house. George squinted toward the villa, its white walls gleaming like polished bone. "Pretty place," he said, "but pretty doesn't always mean warm." I let out a small laugh, surprised at his bluntness. "You noticed that too?" He shrugged. "Houses talk. Some invite you in, some keep you standing at the door. That one looks like it keeps its arms crossed." I liked him immediately. His words held the honesty of a man who had spent a lifetime measuring storms. We talked a little about the weather, about the tide creeping up the seawall. He told me he sometimes sat outside at dawn listening for gulls, because silence can feel different at sea. His words struck me. I was living in silence too, but it was the kind that pressed down instead of lifting. That evening, back inside, I carried my chipped teacup to the counter. The crack in the glaze felt almost warm under my thumb. I poured hot water and watched steam rise, remembering Robert's quiet hum. I let myself close my eyes. For a moment, I could almost hear him, as if silence could bend backward and bring him near. But when I opened my eyes, the villa reminded me where I was. Every surface gleamed, every object in its place, as if waiting for Elena's inspection. I felt the weight of being temporary. The orchids stood in rows, each bloom like a glass eye. I thought of George's words, "Houses talk." This house was telling me I did not belong. So I walked back to the garden, letting the night air wrap around me. I placed my hand on the wooden fence where George had leaned earlier. The wood was rough, splintered, alive. I breathed deeply, It was not comfort, not yet, but it was closer to life than anything inside that villa. I whispered to myself, as if speaking to Robert, "I am still here." And in that whisper, I felt a small defiance grow quiet but steady, like the roots of a plant breaking through stone. I found the safe by accident. I was reaching for a table runner in the back of the linen cupboard when my knuckles struck metal. Behind the towel sat a small door, its latch slightly off as if someone had closed it in a hurry or never meant to close it at all. I pressed 2 fingers against the edge and felt the give. The hinge sighed. The door swung open without resistance, without code, without key. Sunlight from the kitchen window fell across the shelf, and in that pale square lay a stack of envelopes held together by a tired rubber band. The top envelope was thick and cream. The handwriting leaned to the right. On the corner, the return address read, Dr. Vincent Hale. I had heard Elena say that name when she spoke about strategy and timelines. I slid a butter knife under the flap and lifted. Elena, the letter began, and then came the plan. If Nathan resists signing the revised trust this month, direct pressure toward his mother. Encourage a sense of indebtedness. Frame housing as care and cost. Keep all language off text and email. I read the page again and felt the politeness drain from the sentences until what remained was a diagram. I was not Catherine. I was the mother, a lever to be pulled. Care had been converted into currency. My presence tallied like a utility bill. I opened the next letter. Vincent referenced a power of attorney draft. He suggested a signature sample could be assembled from old checks or cards. If we move decisively, he wrote, the villa can be refinanced or liquidated with limited friction. I walked to the sink and turned on the hot water. Steam climbed into my face. I scrubbed my hands the way I used to after removing surgical gloves. In the fog, I saw my husband as he had been one mild winter when the cardiologist shook his head and the room went thin. Clean hands do not shield you from what you must carry. Back at the counter, I opened a third letter and found Elena's handwriting in the margins, small and tidy. She had underlined emotional leverage and written, Nathan will accept if we frame it as stability for the children. An arrow pointed to a line about my contribution to the down payment. Beside it, she had penned one word, gift. That word cut deeper than the rest. A gift grants thanks and removes claims. A gift can be praised in public and erased on paper. I remembered standing at the bank in my nurse's shoes after a double shift, shoulders sore, fear simple and bright in my chest. Nathan had sounded panicked on the phone. Elena had sounded calm. I told myself I was helping my only child into a home. I told myself I was investing in a future table where I would always have a seat. I stacked the letters into a straight pile. Neatness steadies the breath. My pulse did not race. It settled the way a room settles when the code team arrives and everyone chooses a job. There are hours when a body decides collapse or stance. I chose to stand even if the floor belonged to someone else. I carried the pile to the table and sat. The diffuser pushed eucalyptus into the air. The villa hummed with curated calm. Beyond the glass, the seawall shaved the water into a clean edge. I reread the first letter and took a pen from my purse. I circled the sentence about using me as leverage and wrote my name in the margin, Catherine. Not mother as instrument, not a cost center. A person with a history of holding families together when the budget was tight and the night was long. The word indebted rang in my head like a bell that refused to stop. Indebted for what? For nursing strangers through fevers and my son through childhood. For tuition payments when scholarships fell through. for the check that kept this villa from being an address on a wish list. If debt existed here, the ledger was not against me. Something uncurled in my chest, not fury, but alignment, bones returning to their rightful places. I thought of George next door with his rough fence and honest yard. Houses talk, he had said. This house had told me I owed it obedience. These letters told me the plan relied on that obedience. Plans built on silence die when the person you mapped as quiet decides to speak. I slid the letters back into the safe, but first I photographed the opening page. Habit and training both favor accurate records. I returned the stack exactly as I found it, the door left slightly ajar like a mouth pretending to close. Then I washed my chipped cup, dried it with one of Elena's perfect towels, and set it by the stove. The cup looked small against the stone, a bruise on marble. It also looked like a flag. I am a nurse by training. My work is to clean wounds, chart facts, and speak with a steady voice when panic would do harm. I have spent a lifetime keeping others alive. I have earned the right to keep my own dignity breathing. I am not leverage. I am not a debt. I will not be silent this time. The next morning, I returned to the linen closet. I told myself it was only to straighten the shelves, but my hands reached for the safe before I could reason with them. The door still hung loose. The stack of letters waited like a patient chart left open at the nurse's station. I lifted them out and carried them to the table where sunlight laid a bright rectangle across the surface. The first envelope I chose was thinner, its flap sealed with tape instead of glue. Inside was a draft of a power of attorney. My name appeared in print at the top, followed by lines of authority, the right to sign, to transfer, to sell. The signature at the bottom was mine, or at least an imitation of mine. My breath snagged in my chest. Whoever traced those letters of my name knew the slope of my K, the long loop of the M in more. But it was not my hand. I held the page closer and thought of the hospital years ago, when paperwork decided who lived or died. I remembered a frantic night when a man needed surgery and his wife was too panicked to sign. I pressed the pen into her palm, guided her trembling hand to the line-whispered sign, "Please sign, or he will not make it." She signed, and the surgeons rushed him into the theater. Her signature saved him. Now a forged one threatened to erase me. The symmetry crushed me. The tool I once trusted to preserve life had turned sharp against my own. I opened another letter. This one was longer, typed on Vincent Hale's letterhead, but Elena's handwriting filled the margins. The subject line read, "Property Strategy June." The body outlined refinancing options, the possibility of transferring ownership quietly, the timing of a potential sale if market conditions improved. Elena had underlined the words, "future stability." Next to that in her script, she wrote, "Nathan must see this as responsible." I placed my hand flat on the paper and closed my eyes. I had given Nathan the down payment when he and Elena first dreamed of this villa. I had worked double shifts, stretched my retirement, pulled money from the account Robert and I built for our twilight years. I told myself it was an investment in family. I told myself I would always have a corner in their home, a chair at their table. Now the documents framed my help as a gift already spent, a sacrifice dissolved into air. I sat very still, letting the villa hum around me. The diffuser pumped its fragrance. The refrigerator clicked. The motion light blinked to life as if sensing my stillness. For a moment, I could not tell whether the house breathed or I did. Another memory surfaced, nights when I signed dozens of medication orders with quick precision, my pen scratching like rain. Nurses must sign without hesitation. Hesitation can cost lives. I signed and signed, trusting the system, believing signatures were anchors of truth. But now, here was my name bent into a weapon. Someone had copied my hand to make me smaller, to reduce me to an obstacle to be managed. I touched the margin where Elena had written her careful notes. Her handwriting was beautiful, neat, almost tender. That made the cruelty sharper. She had taken my contribution, my love, disguised as dollars, and converted it into leverage. The ink said you were generous, but generosity does not mean ownership. The ink said you gave, so now you must give again. Tears pricked, but they did not fall. I had spent decades drying other people's tears. My own rarely spilled. Instead, I felt a burn deep in my chest, a grief that was not loud but heavy. It was the grief of being useful until you are not, of being thanked until the ledger says you owe. I folded the papers back into their envelopes. My hands did not shake. They were steady the way they had been when I lifted fragile infants, when I adjusted IV drips drop by drop. Years of nursing had trained me to act when pain appeared, not only to witness it. The villa looked unchanged. The orchids still stood straight, the glasses still shone, the towels still rested in their precise folds. Yet everything had shifted. I knew now that my place in this house was not a place at all. It was a calculation, a line in someone else's plan. I carried my chipped teacup to the sink, filled it with hot water, and stood watching the steam curl upward. The crack in the glaze caught the light like a scar. I whispered almost to the cup itself, almost to Robert's memory. I was never a gift to erase. I was the foundation. I knew then that I could not continue as before. Silence had once been my shield, but silence now was consent. And I was done consenting to my own disappearance. I sat with the letters spread across the dining table, the words staring back at me like eyes that never blinked. For hours, I walked the villa, opening drawers and cupboards, searching for more traces of their plan. Each room whispered that I was only a placeholder, an extra body filling a space designed for order, not love. By the time night fell, the silence had turned heavy enough to choke. I poured tea into my chipped cup and stood by the window. Beyond the glass, the ocean shifted in moonlight, steady and patient. My reflection hovered in the pain-tired eyes, gray hair, pulled back shoulders, curved as if carrying weight no one could see. I felt small in that immaculate kitchen, but the anger rising inside me made me stand straighter. I reached for my phone. My thumb hovered over the screen, uncertain. It had been years since I last called Mary. She and I had worked side by side in the hospital for 2 decades. We had endured endless nights of alarms, blood pressure charts, and weary prayers whispered over patients. When Robert died, I withdrew. She sent cards, invitations, even a photograph of her grandchild, but I seldom replied. Still, my hands moved before my doubt could stop them. I scrolled until her number appeared and pressed call. The line rang twice. Then her voice, older but unmistakable, answered. "Catherine, is that you?" My throat tightened. "It's me, Mary." "Well, I'll be. I thought you'd forgotten me." "How are you, love?" I laughed softly, though nothing was funny. "That's a complicated question." Her tone shifted, sharp but kind, the way she used to be during triage. "Tell me what's happening." I told her about the villa, about Nathan and Elena leaving me behind with orchids and instructions. I told her about the safe, the letters, the forged signature, the property strategies. My voice shook only once when I said the word leverage. She listened without interrupting, the way only a nurse knows how to listen. When I finished, silence hummed across the line. Then she spoke, measured and direct. "Catherine, If this were a patient, would you let an infection sit untreated? Would you say maybe it will heal itself? Maybe it won't spread? I closed my eyes. The truth struck with clean precision. No, I whispered. Exactly, she said. You would scrub it, drain it, stitch it, do whatever needed doing. Because infection ignored becomes blood poisoning. Betrayal ignored becomes something worse. This is no different. You can't let this fester. Not for them and not for you. Her words landed like antiseptic, sharp stinging, but healing. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, but Nathan is my son. I keep thinking, maybe I should protect him, shield him from the worst of it. Protect him, she repeated. Catherine, you already did. His whole life. You shielded him when he was too young, when he was too weak, when he was still learning to walk. But this is not a boy you're shielding now. This is a man, and a man who is standing by while his wife erases you on paper. Protection is not silence. Protection is sometimes saying no. I bit my lip until I tasted iron. She was right. I had been confusing love with erasure. Mary went on, her voice calm, certain. Listen, I left nursing 5 years ago. I'm working now as a paralegal in a family law office. If you have copies of those letters, if you can gather proof of the forged signature, you have a case. Maybe not in court tomorrow, but enough to make them know you're not helpless. Enough to stop the infection from spreading. I pressed a hand to my chest. You're saying I should fight back. She corrected me gently. I'm saying you should treat yourself with the same urgency you once gave every patient. You didn't let them bleed out on the table. Don't let yourself bleed out in silence. For a moment, I could almost see us back in the hospital, standing shoulder to shoulder at 3 a.m, hands raw from washing, eyes burning from fatigue. She had always been the one to steady me when doubt crept in. And now, across the years and miles, she steadied me again. I'll do it, I said finally, my voice firmer than I expected. I'll keep records. I'll document everything. That's my Catherine, she replied. Precise, thorough, unshakable when it counts. We stayed on the line another half hour, speaking of small things. Her grandchildren, my garden. The way the world felt different now. But under it all pulsed the reminder I was not powerless, not unless I agreed to be. After we hung up, I stood for a long while in the kitchen. The diffuser still hummed, but its scent no longer drowned me. I looked at the safe in the next room, its door still slightly ajar. I no longer saw it as a mouth threatening to swallow me. I saw it as a wound, ugly but treatable. I rinsed my chipped cup, dried it carefully, and set it in its place. My reflection in the window no longer looked entirely small. The line of my shoulders straightened. Mary's question echoed in my mind like a litany. Would you let a wound go untreated? No, I would not. Not anymore. I whispered into the quiet villa, I will not fester. I will heal. The morning after my call with Mary, I woke with a kind of steadiness I had not felt in years. The villa was still immaculate, still humming with its curated calm, but I no longer felt trapped inside it. I had a task, and tasks have always given me breath. I returned to the dining table where the letters lay in their neat stack. I spread them out again this time, not as a woman reading her own erasure, but as a nurse preparing a chart. Every page became a specimen, every line of handwriting a vital sign. I set my phone beside me and began to take photographs frame by frame, careful to capture dates, signatures, and marginal notes. My hands did not shake. Precision has always been my gift. The camera shutter clicked each sound like a heartbeat. With every image stored, I felt my pulse slow. There is comfort in evidence. Words spoken can be denied. Paper cannot. After photographing everything, I chose a smaller pile to separate. Not all the letters, only the ones that revealed the core Vincent's instructions about leverage the draft power of attorney Elena's margin notes, reducing my sacrifice to a gift. These were the wounds that mattered most. I slipped them into a plain envelope I found in the villa's desk. On the front, I wrote my own name and address in deliberate strokes. Then I walked to the drawer where Elena kept her fountain pens. I took one dark blue ink and signed across the flap. Not because it needed my name, but because it reminded me that I still had a hand in this story. I carried the envelope in my purse as I left the villa for the first time since their departure. The Florida sun struck my face bright and almost too warm, but real. I walked down the street to the small post office tucked between a pharmacy and a bait shop. The bell over the door jingled as I entered. Behind the counter, a clerk looked up. She was young freckles scattered across her nose. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "Yes," I said, my voice calm. "I'd like this mailed to myself. Certified, please." She weighed the envelope, affixed the stamps, and pressed a red seal onto the corner. The thunk of the stamp echoed louder than it should have. She slid the receipt across the counter. "All set. You'll get it in a few days." I tucked the receipt into my wallet. That small slip of paper felt heavier than all the crystal glasses in Elena's cupboards. It was proof that time had witnessed me, that an impartial mark, the post office seal, stood between me and denial. As I stepped back into the sunlight, I whispered under my breath, "I don't need noise. I need proof." The phrase steadied me, repeated like a prayer. For years, I had kept peace by keeping quiet, believing that stillness meant safety. But peace built on silence is no peace at all. Peace requires truth, and truth requires records. Walking home, I passed George's fence. He was in his yard mending a section of wire. He glanced up and waved. "Morning, Catherine. Off to run errands." "Something like that," I said. I considered telling him more, but the time was not right. Some acts are strongest when kept between you and the page until the day they are needed. Back inside the villa, I placed my purse on the counter and poured tea into my chipped cup. The steam rose, curling in shapes that reminded me of Robert's breath in winter. I sat by the window and watched the tide shuffle against the seawall. For the first time, I did not feel like a subject of surveillance. I felt like a custodian of my own record. I arranged the photographed pages into a folder, labeled it simply, "Evidence." Nurses know the value of labeling. A mislabeled vial can cost a life. A mislabeled chart can cost justice. I would not make that mistake. As evening drew near, I lit a candle on the table. The flame flickered against the letters, throwing shadows that looked like moving hands across the paper. I thought about how easily others had handled my name, my money, my silence. But tonight, the papers rested under my control. I opened my journal, a plain notebook with a green cover, and wrote, "Today I mailed the truth to myself. The words may outlive me, but at least they will not vanish." Later, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling. The villa's hum continued, its lights winking on and off with sensors. Yet I no longer felt the same weight pressing on me. The safe, once a mouth threatening to swallow me, had become a source of strength. What it held was poison. Yes, but poison can be turned into antidote when handled correctly. I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the beat beneath my palm. Evidence, I thought, is the pulse of justice. It may not shout, it may not roar, but it endures. And as sleep pulled me under, I repeated my quiet vow. I don't need noise. I need proof. I had spent weeks in the villa trying to leave no trace. Every dish washed and hidden back in its place, every towel folded in Elena's rigid thirds, every footprint wiped from the polished floor. But after mailing those letters to myself, I stopped. Not out of carelessness, but out of choice. I brewed tea in the chipped cup and let the fragrance of chamomile drift across the spotless kitchen. I left the cup in the sink until the stain marked the porcelain. I baked bread one afternoon and allowed the smell to fill the house for hours, heavy and human. I wanted the villa to remember me, to hold my presence in its corners. I stopped hiding my knitting bag in the closet. I left it on the couch, soft yarn spilling over the cushions. I played the radio while I cooked, humming along with old country songs. When the diffuser's mechanical hum grew too sharp, I unplugged it and replaced its lemon with the honest scent of onions sizzling in butter. It felt like rebellion, but quiet rebellion, small marks of a life the house had not asked for. One evening, I returned to the stack of documents, the ones I had copied and sealed away with the post office stamp. The forged signature stared at me from the page. Catherine Moore curved and neat, the loop of the K too perfect, the tail of the M too shallow. I lifted the paper and held it beneath the lamp. My hand trembled, not from weakness, but from recognition. That name was mine, but not mine. I sat very still, slowing the rhythm of my breath. The room around me blurred. Only the ink remained sharp. For a moment, I imagined Elena sitting at her desk, practicing my name, tracing it until it looked effortless. I imagined Vincent watching, nodding, telling her the angle was correct. And Nathan, my son, somewhere in that plan, silent, not stopping it. My hand trembled again, then stilled. Slowly, deliberately, I smiled. It was not a smile of joy, but of clarity. They had tried to reduce me to ink, to a line on a page they could bend to their will, but the very falseness of it gave me power. A forgery reveals more than a signature, it reveals intent. I set the paper down and rested my palms on the table. For years, I had silenced myself to keep Nathan comfortable, to keep peace in the family, to be the pliant mother who accepted whatever role was offered. I had told myself that was love, but staring at that imitation of my name, I wondered if love had become my excuse for disappearing. The moral weight pressed against me. Nathan was my son. I remembered him as a boy running barefoot through the yard, cheeks red from summer heat. I remembered the nights he sat at the kitchen table, pencil tapping while I checked his math homework. I remembered the way Robert used to lift him high into the air and how Nathan's laugh filled the room with light. Could I turn against that boy, now grown into a man who stood beside a wife willing to erase me? Could I expose him, force him to admit what had been planned? My chest ached with the question. Forgiveness had always come naturally to me. In the hospital, I forgave patients who lashed out in pain. I forgave families who shouted at nurses while fear strangled them. But forgiveness here felt like surrender. A surrender not to pain, but to manipulation. I whispered into the empty room, should I forgive? The silence answered. The forgiveness without accountability is not forgiveness at all. It is permission. And permission was what they had counted on. I knew then that the choice before me was not between love and anger. It was between dignity and erasure. I walked through the villa barefoot, my steps soft against the cold stone. I touched the back of a chair, the edge of a counter, the frame of a door. Each touch left no mark, but in my mind, each touch declared, I am here. I exist. I am not a shadow in your design. In the living room, I opened the window. The warm Florida air drifted in, carrying salt and faint traces of night jasmine. The curtains billowed. I imagined Elena frowning at the wrinkles, imagined Nathan adjusting the rod to close them tighter. I let the air fill the space anyway. I let the curtains ripple like sails. Later that night, I sat again with the forged signature. I placed my own real signature beside it, written freshly in blue ink on a scrap of paper. The difference was obvious to me: the uneven press of my pen, the slight slant when my arthritis tugged at my wrist. My flaws proved me real. Their perfection proved them false. I tucked both pages into a folder labeled Evidence, then closed it gently. I no longer needed to erase my traces. My presence, my paper, my proof, all were stronger than silence. When I turned off the lamp, the villa fell into shadow. But inside me, something glowed steady. I had spent years believing silence was my shield. Now I knew it could also be my weapon. A weapon that cut without noise, without violence, only with proof and resolve. I climbed into bed and whispered the vow I had carried all day. I don't need to shout. I don't need to beg. I only need to endure long enough for the truth to speak. I had gathered my proof, sealed it, mailed it, photographed it, labeled it. Yet evidence alone did not calm the storm inside me. At night, when the villa sank into its curated silence, I lay awake, rehearsing words I might one day say to Nathan, words I wanted him to hear, though I doubted he would truly listen. So one afternoon, I sat at the dining table with a blank sheet of paper. The light came in through the tall windows, pale and sharp. My chipped cup sat beside me, half filled with tea gone cold. I picked up a pen and let my hand move, not caring whether the ink shook with my breath. Konko the Jukanha. But I will keep my dignity. That was the first line I wrote. My eyes stung when I read it back. I did not mean it as a threat. I meant it as a truth, the kind a mother should not have to declare to her own son. The words poured slowly, haltingly onto the page. I wrote of the down payment I had offered when they were desperate to own this villa. I wrote of the nights I stayed with the children, so they could travel, so they could rest. I wrote of Robert gone too soon, and how I had tried to carry the weight of family alone after that. And then I wrote of the letters, the forgery, the cold precision of being labeled leverage. I did not write in anger. I wrote in clarity. Anger has heat. Clarity has weight. When I finished, I folded the page into thirds and slipped it into an envelope. I did not seal it. Some letters are not meant to travel. Some exist only to steady the hand that writes them. I walked to my bedroom and opened the top drawer of my dresser. Inside lay a cardigan I often wore in the evenings, a faded gray knit with pockets deep enough to hold my hands when I felt uncertain. I slid the envelope into the left pocket and pressed it down with my palm. If the day came when words were needed, I would carry them close. Until then, the letter would rest against my heart like a hidden shield. That evening, I brewed fresh tea and carried the cup to the front door. I opened it and stepped onto the porch. The air smelled of salt and faint smoke from a neighbor's grill. Ahead stretched the narrow strip of lawn, the seawall, and beyond it, the restless water. I stood at the threshold, 1 foot inside the villa, 1 foot outside. The door framed me the way hospital doors once framed me when I paused before entering a room where grief waited. I leaned on the frame and let the breeze lift strands of my hair. For a long while, I simply breathed. Then I spoke aloud softly, to no one but myself. The next time I cross this door, I will walk straight. No more bent shoulders, no more lowered eyes. The ocean answered in rhythm, pulling and returning as if echoing my vow. I remembered the day Robert and I first crossed the threshold into the little house we bought together. We carried boxes of books and a second-hand sofa. The paint smelled new, the mortgage felt enormous, but the joy was real. We told ourselves we were beginning. I realize now that thresholds mark more than beginnings. They mark decisions. When to enter, when to leave, when to stand tall and refuse to bow. I looked back into the villa, its polished surfaces gleaming even in dusk. It was beautiful. Yes, but beauty without warmth is brittle. I imagined Elena inspecting the countertops, Nathan adjusting the thermostat, each of them believing control equals safety. They had forgotten that love cannot be engineered like air conditioning. My letter weighed in the cardigan pocket, though the cardigan itself hung inside the dresser. Just knowing it was there steadied me. Those words, "Con ko, the Jew kunha." But I will keep my dignity were now part of me. Even unspoken, they gave my spine strength. I stayed at the threshold until the sky turned violet. The porch light flickered on automatic, its glow soft against the night. Finally, I stepped outside, fully leaving the door ajar behind me. I walked across the lawn to the seawall. The waves lapped softly against stone carrying secrets, carrying promises. I whispered to the water, I am ready. Ready not for battle, but for truth. Ready to face whatever Nathan and Elena believed they had built. Ready to keep myself intact, even if it meant leaving them behind. When I turned back toward the villa, its windows shone pale and expressionless. But I no longer felt like a shadow inside them. I felt like a figure standing at the edge of something larger, something freer. The threshold would not frighten me again. The next time I crossed it, I would do so with straight-back, steady gaze and the quiet power of a woman who has written her truth, even if she never hands the letter over. They returned on a Sunday evening, the kind of evening when the air smelled faintly of salt and gasoline, the light bruised purple against the water. I was already sitting on the porch, my chipped cup balanced in my hand, the tea long gone cold. I did not rise when their car pulled into the drive. The tires crunched across the gravel. The headlights swept the lawn before fading into silence. Doors opened, then shut, quick and efficient. I heard Elena's laughter, first bright, practiced too sharp for the hour. Nathan followed with a grunt as he pulled the suitcases from the trunk. They did not see me right away. I watched their silhouettes move across the yard, two figures framed by the glow of the porch light. They mounted the steps, keys jingling. Only when Nathan reached for the lock did his eyes catch mine. He froze the key hanging in the air. "Mom," he said, voice cautious. "You're still up." "I am," I answered. My voice was steady, neither warm nor cold. Just steady. Elena stepped closer, the corner of her mouth lifting. "You didn't have to wait. We expected you'd be in bed." "I wasn't waiting," I said simply. For a long breath, the only sound was the ocean against the seawall and the faint hum of insects in the garden. Nathan cleared his throat and finally turned the key. The door opened with its familiar click. They carried the suitcases inside. I stayed where I was, letting the porch hold me. When Nathan returned to the doorway, his face looked tighter, his jaw set. He stepped onto the porch, hands shoved into his pockets. "Mom," he said slowly, "I need to ask you something, and I want the truth." I held his gaze. "Then ask." He glanced toward the living room where Elena busied herself arranging the mail left on the console. His voice dropped. "What did you take from the safe?" The words fell heavy between us, almost a confession in their asking. I let the silence stretch. Silence is its own kind of answer. Finally, I spoke. "I didn't take anything, Nathan. I only took back the truth." His shoulders stiffened. He tried to mask it, but the shift was visible. He had expected denial, perhaps confusion. Not calm, not clarity. Elena's voice, carried from inside, clipped and sharp. We should all sit down, have a civil conversation. I didn't move. I am already seated, I replied, my eyes never leaving Nathan. He sat across from me on the porch chair, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. The porch light made his face look older, shadows cutting lines where boyhood once lived. Mom. He began softer now. Why would you go through our things? Why would you open something that wasn't yours? I let the chipped cup rest on the table beside me. Because when people hide lies in plain sight, the truth doesn't need permission to be found. His mouth opened, then shut again. The silence grew heavier, thicker. Elena stepped out onto the porch, her linen dress crisp even after travel. She crossed her arms. If you've misunderstood anything, we can explain. But going through private files, that's a violation. Her words floated like smoke, but they did not reach me. I turned instead to Nathan. Do you call it private when my name is written in forged ink? Do you call it private when my sacrifice is labeled as leverage? He flinched just slightly. Elena's expression hardened. She opened her mouth again, but Nathan raised a hand, silencing her. For the first time, he looked directly at me without pretense. His lips pressed together, his eyes clouded. We sat in that heavy quiet, three figures bound not by blood, but by the fracture of it. Finally, Nathan spoke, voice low. What are you going to do? I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. I don't need to do anything tonight. The truth already exists, whether you acknowledge it or not. I mailed it to myself. It has a stamp and a date, Nathan. It will arrive in my hands with the weight of the law behind it. Elena hissed softly as though the words stung. Nathan stared at the porch boards. I watched him wrestle with himself, the son I raised against the man he had become. I did not fill the silence. That was my weapon now. Silence, steady and unyielding. Minutes passed like that, the ocean marking time behind us. Finally, I rose from the chair. The wooden boards creaked under my weight. I set the chipped cup gently on the table. You both look tired, I said, my voice calm. Travel wears people down. Rest tonight. Tomorrow will come with or without excuses. I turned toward the door, not to enter, but to pause at the threshold. I placed my hand on the frame and looked out at the sea, dark and endless. I straightened my spine, the vow from earlier still alive inside me. The next time I cross a door, I will do it standing tall. I left them behind on the porch, their silence heavier than mine. And for the first time, I did not feel like a guest in that house. I felt like the keeper of its truth. The next morning, the villa no longer hummed with silence. It vibrated with tension. Elena moved through the kitchen like a blade opening cupboards with sharp pulls, slamming drawers shut with too much force. She didn't look at me, but her anger filled the air like smoke after a kitchen fire. Finally, she turned. Her smile was gone. Catherine, she said, voice clipped. What exactly did you do while we were gone? I set my chipped teacup on the table and looked at her evenly. I lived here. I watered your orchids. I made tea. And I read what you left unlocked. Her eyes narrowed. The safe. I didn't answer immediately. Silence is more cutting than denial. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. If you touch things that weren't yours, private matters, you've crossed a line. I stood calm and deliberate and walked to the desk in the corner of the living room. My laptop waited there. I opened it and clicked into the program Mary had helped me set up. Within moments, the screen filled with her face. She wore her glasses low on her nose, her hair pulled back in a bun streaked with gray. Morning, Catherine, she said warmly. Then she noticed the two figures behind me. I assume this is your son and his wife? I turned the screen so they could see. Elena stiffened. Nathan hovered near the back of the room, his face pale. Elena forced a brittle laugh. "And who are you?" Mary didn't flinch. "My name is Mary Collins. I worked with Catherine for 20 years in the hospital. Now I work in a family law office, and I've seen enough of your letters to know what you intended." The color drained from Elena's face. She glanced quickly at Nathan, but he kept his gaze on the floor. Mary continued, her voice steady and professional. She held up a printed page. This, for instance, from Dr. Vincent Hale. "If Nathan resists signing the revised trust this month, direct pressure toward his mother. Encourage a sense of indebtedness. Frame housing as care and cost. Do you deny this is in your handwriting? Elena?" Elena's lips parted, then pressed together. Her silence was its own confession. Mary lifted another page. "And here a draft power of attorney with Catherine's forged signature. You will find the slant of the K too perfect, the tail of the M inconsistent. Forgery is a serious matter. Do you dispute this?" Nathan shifted uncomfortably, shoulders bent, eyes still cast down. His silence cut deeper than any words could. Elena's voice cracked like glass. "You had no right to go through those papers." I stepped closer, my voice calm but firm. "And you had no right to use my name as ink for your plans. Privacy is not a shield for deceit." Elena's face flushed red, her composure slipping. "You don't understand. We were trying to secure the future for the children, for Nathan, for all of us. You should have trusted us." I met her eyes. "Trust is not built on secrets, and the future you describe erases me while still holding my sacrifice." Mary's voice carried through the screen, clear and sharp. "Mrs. Moore has every legal standing to claim her investment in this property. We have documentation of her transfer emails acknowledging her contribution, and now your own letters describing it as leverage. If you want to discuss this in court, we can." But Catherine would prefer resolution in writing, not in litigation. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting could have been. Elena looked as if she might argue, but her words faltered. Nathan finally raised his head, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. There was no anger in them now, only shame. I spoke slow and steady, letting each word land. "The money I gave, I want it recognized. In writing, black and white. If not, then the court will make the recognition for you." Elena opened her mouth, but Nathan stopped her with a quiet, "Enough." His voice was low, but the weight of it silenced the room. He turned to me. "What do you want, Mom?" "I already said it," I replied. "Paper that honors the truth. Nothing more, nothing less. You can keep the villa if you wish. I will keep my dignity." Elena's arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face pale now instead of flushed. She muttered, "This is absurd." Mary leaned toward the camera. "What's absurd is believing you could erase a woman who built this family with her hands and her sacrifice. Catherine is not invisible, not anymore." The room held still. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to pause. Nathan lowered his head again, as if bowing to the weight of everything revealed. I closed the laptop gently, the conversation suspended but not ended. The power of silence filled the room stronger than any raised voice. I looked at Elena one last time. "You built a house of glass, Elena, and you forgot glass reflects." She turned away, her shoulders rigid. Nathan stayed where he was, still bent under the truth. I walked back to my chair on the porch, picked up my chipped cup, and let the air move through me. I had not shouted, I had not begged. I had only spoken truth and placed paper where silence once lived. And that was enough. The day after the confrontation with Mary on the screen, the villa felt different. The air no longer hummed with Elena's curated calm. It sagged with something rawer, guilt, fear, resentment. I moved through the kitchen, slowly pouring tea into my chipped cup, letting the sound of boiling water replace the silence they could not fill. Nathan sat at the table, his elbows on the polished wood. He looked older than he had days before, lines deepening around his mouth. Elena lingered near the window, arms crossed, tight eyes narrowed, not at me, but at the horizon, as if the ocean could provide a script. Nathan finally broke the quiet. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "you have to understand. We were only trying to make sure you'd be settled. We just wanted you to be at peace." I lifted the cup to my lips and sipped. His words, dressed as kindness, carried the same weight as the forged papers. I set the cup down the crack in its glaze, catching the light. "No," I said slowly, each word deliberate. "You didn't want me at peace. You wanted me quiet." The sentence hung between us like a bell that refused to stop ringing. Nathan's mouth opened, but no words came. Elena shifted the sound of her linen sleeve brushing against the glass. For years, my life had been about keeping the peace-folding towels her way, speaking softly, never leaving traces in the villa. I had believed compliance was care, silence was love. But speaking that line aloud broke the spell. It reversed the balance. For the first time, Nathan sat in silence while I named the truth. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes clouded. It wasn't like that, he murmured. We thought it was best. I leaned forward, my voice quiet but sharp. Best for whom? You, who could control the house without resistance. Elena, who could decide what counted as family and what didn't. Or me, who would shrink smaller and smaller until I disappeared entirely. The silence after my words was long, heavy. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to hush. I let the pause stretch. In the hospital, I had learned the power of silence. A patient in denial often filled silence with the truth. A family avoiding reality often confessed when the nurse simply waited. Now I let Nathan and Elena feel that silence pressing against them. Elena finally snapped, her voice brittle. "You're twisting everything. We opened our home to you. We gave you a room. I interrupted, not with anger, but with calm precision. "You gave me walls, not a home. You gave me space, but not dignity. You smiled while writing letters that called me leverage." Her face paled, and she looked away. Nathan rubbed his temples. "We were under pressure," he said softly. "The mortgage, the kids, the future, it all felt so heavy. We thought if we structured things right, if we planned carefully, no one would have to worry later." I met his eyes. "And did you think about the weight I already carried? The shifts I worked to make sure you never went hungry, the money I gave when you and Elena wanted this villa. You dressed control as care, Nathan, but control is not love." He swallowed hard, his hands tightening into fists on the table. For a moment, I almost reached across, almost softened. But then I remembered the forged signature, the line that turned my name into a tool. I whispered more to myself than to them. "You wanted me quiet, and I almost gave you that. Almost." The echo of my words filled the room, a steady rhythm that neither of them dared to interrupt. I stood carrying my cup to the sink. The small act felt enormous, choosing when to move, when to speak, when to be still. My reflection in the window above the sink showed a woman not bowed, not erased, but present. Behind me, chairs scraped. Nathan muttered something under his breath. Elena tried again, her voice higher now, almost pleading. "You could forgive us. Families forgive." I dried my cup with one of her stiff towels and folded it carefully over the counter. Then I turned my voice quiet but unwavering. Forgiveness requires truth, and you haven't offered any. Not yet. The silence returned thicker than before. They looked at me, waiting for more, but I gave them nothing. My silence was no longer submission. It was power, deliberate and chosen. I left them in the kitchen and walked out to the porch. The evening air carried the smell of salt and hibiscus. I stood at the threshold, my back straight, and let the quiet sea echo what I had already said. They wanted me quiet, but now they would learn the difference between being silenced and choosing silence as a weapon. By the third morning after their return, the villa felt like a waiting room. No music, no pans, only the drone of air measuring a comfort none of us had. I brewed tea and stood at the window while Nathan paced with his phone, and Elena stared at the stove as if a flame might appear and tell her what to say. Nathan stopped. "Mom," he said, careful the tone doctors use before decisions. "I spoke to the bank and an attorney. We will repay your down payment. We will put it in writing." He swallowed. "We will sign." I set the cup on the counter and faced him. "Paper," I said, "not promises." "Paper?" He answered. He pulled out a chair, sat, and slid a printed draft toward me. The numbers were there, the date of my transfer, the amount with fair appreciation, a schedule if needed, a clause acknowledging housing costs until repayment. Elena did not sit. She stood behind him, arms crossed so tightly the linen bit into her skin. Her eyes were dry, the shine in them, not strength, but calculation, starved for options. She said nothing. I read every line. I asked 2 changes. Mary had trained me to ask. First, remove the word gift. Second, add a sentence acknowledging my years of childcare while they built this villa's life. Nathan adjusted the draft without argument. The printer coughed new pages. Warm ink rose into the room. We signed with blue pens. The sound of the nibs on paper felt louder than the ocean. I watched my name arrive in my own hand. Imperfect, human, real. Nathan signed his. His fingers trembled. Elena added only her initials in the witness line. When it was done, Nathan folded the copies, slid one into a folder, and pushed it to me. "This is yours," he said. I held the folder. "Look at me, Nathan." He did. In his eyes, I saw the boy counting change at the grocery store. I saw the man who forgot the cost of what he was given. "I accept what is due," I said, "but money is not the medicine here." He lowered his gaze. "I know." Elena shifted. The fight had left her. What remained was the shape of a person who mistook control for love. She said thinly, "We can move forward now." "You can move forward," I said. "I am moving on." I walked to my bedroom and opened the top drawer. The gray cardigan lay where I had left it, its pocket holding the letter I had written and never sealed. I slid the envelope free and returned to the kitchen. The room smelled of eucalyptus again. Elena must have plugged the diffuser back in. I clicked it off. Real air belongs in endings. I placed the letter at the center of the counter, not hidden, simply present. I pressed my palm on it the way I once pressed gauze to a wound. Nathan watched. "What is that?" he asked. "My clarity," I said. "Read it after I leave or never. It changes nothing now." He reached for the folder I still held. I let him take it, then accepted it back when he placed it carefully in my hands, a passing more honest than apology. I tucked it into my bag and zipped the bag closed, the teeth catching, then aligning. Elena whispered, "Where will you go home?" I said. "A new one." I took the chipped cup to the sink and washed it slow and thorough. I dried it with one of her towels, then folded the towel in halves, not thirds. I slipped the cup into my bag. It clinked softly, a bell under cloth. At the door, I paused, one hand on the frame. The seawall held the tide like a stern jaw. The sky was the pale blue of clean scrubs. I straightened my back. I did not look to see if they followed. Thresholds are best crossed without witnesses. Nathan, I said into the light. Not turning, send me the final signed scan before the bank closes today. My voice was the one I used when a patient needed medicine on time. He answered yes, quick and relieved. I stepped onto the porch, then down to the path. With each step, the villa receded. With each step, my breath grew easier. At the gate, I stopped and listened. Inside the house kept its perfect temperature. Inside, papers cooled on the counter under a letter that would speak when ready. I opened the gate and walked toward the street, the sun touching my shoulders like a benediction. Severance, I thought, is not a cut when chosen. It is a suture, skin meeting skin in a new line. And this line is mine for good. The morning I chose to leave the villa looked the same as it always had, perfect surfaces, orchids trimmed, floors shining. Yet I felt no obligation to keep it spotless anymore. My duty here was finished. I began to pack quietly. I didn't own much in this place. A few sweaters folded neatly into a suitcase, my notebook stacked beside them. I slid my small collection of paperbacks into the bag one by one, their spines softened from years of rereading. The chipped teacup wrapped in a dish towel went into the side pocket. It had been with me through every stage of this battle-proof that imperfection could endure where perfection cracked. On the dresser lay Robert's watch, the one I had carried, though it no longer ticked. I pressed it into my palm, remembering the weight of his hand guiding Nathan across the street when he was still a boy. That watch would come with me. Not because I needed the time, but because I needed the reminder that love once true leaves traces that no forgery can erase. I looked around the room one last time. The bed was neatly made, the curtains drawn back. Nothing here bore me anymore. No object claimed my shape. That was a relief. I closed the suitcase and lifted it, surprised by how light it felt. When I reached the front door, I paused at the threshold. For months, I had crossed this line, bent quiet, carrying the weight of gratitude I was expected to show. Now, I stood tall. My spine felt straighter than it had in years, as if the truth itself had threaded steel through my bones. I placed my hand on the doorframe, steady and slow. Beyond it, the seawall shone in the morning sun waves, glinting like polished silver. The breeze carried the smell of salt and cut grass. For a moment, I let myself breathe deeply, filling my lungs with something not curated by anyone else. I whispered, "This is the last time." Then I stepped forward, crossing into the light without looking back. The path crunched under my shoes. I walked down toward the gate suitcase, rolling quietly beside me. Each step felt less like departure and more like return to myself, to the woman I had been before silence became survival. As I reached the end of the drive, George was trimming his hedges. He looked up, squinting against the sun. His weathered face broke into a half smile. Well, now, he called, resting his shears against the fence. "You look different today, Catherine." I adjusted the strap on my shoulder. "Do I?" He nodded, eyes kind, lighter, like someone set down a heavy load. I let a small laugh escape, soft but genuine. Maybe I finally did. George studied me for a moment, then tipped his cap. "Good. That house never suited you. You're not made for silence that heavy." His words struck me as simple truth. I raised my hand in a small wave, the kind neighbors exchange when nothing more needs to be said. Then I kept walking, suitcase rolling steady on the sidewalk, the villa shrinking behind me. I didn't glance back once. Some doors deserve no farewell. The cottage stood at the edge of a quiet lake, its blue door bright against the white siding. A garden of orange trees leaned toward the water, their branches heavy with fruit leaves glinting under the Florida sun. It wasn't grand, it wasn't polished, but the moment I stepped onto the small porch, I knew it was mine. The air carried a different kind of silence than the villa, not heavy, not watchful. This silence breathed. It moved with the rustle of the trees, the hum of dragonflies, the faint lapping of water against the bank. I set my suitcase down on the porch and exhaled as though I had been holding my breath for months. Inside, the rooms were modest. A narrow kitchen with mismatched tiles, a living room where the floor creaked underfoot, a single bedroom with a window looking out at the lake. Nothing gleamed. Nothing pretended. Every corner welcomed touch. The first thing I unpacked was the wind chime I had bought at the Sunday market weeks ago, a handmade piece with ceramic leaves. I carried it out to the back door and hung it from the eave. When the breeze lifted, the notes rang unevenly soft and imperfect, like laughter breaking through grief. I closed my eyes and listened. It sounded like a beginning. I spent the morning unpacking slowly. Books stacked on shelves, my notebooks lined in a row. Robert's watch placed gently on the bedside table. The chipped teacup found its home in a cabinet that already held a few sturdy mugs. I brewed tea in it and let the steam rise through the room. No one here would scold me for leaving the scent behind. By noon, the sound of a truck pulling into the drive startled me. I wiped my hands on my cardigan and stepped outside. Nathan was there, standing beside the open tailgate, a box in his arms. He looked tired, but less guarded than when I had last seen him. "I thought I'd bring the last of your things," he said. His voice was careful, as if testing the air. I nodded and walked to meet him. "Thank you." He carried the box inside, setting it on the floor by the bookshelf. His eyes roamed the cottage, pausing at the blue door, the kitchen window, the small details that made the place mine. "It suits you," he said after a moment. "Feels calm." I didn't answer. I busied myself cutting twine from the box, pulling free my knitting bag, and a stack of framed photographs. Nathan lingered by the window. "Mom," he said softly, "you seem peaceful." I set one of the photographs on the shelf, a picture of Robert holding Nathan when he was still a boy. The frame wobbled slightly, and I steadied it with my hand. Then I looked at my son. His eyes searched mine, waiting for words. But I gave him none. Silence had once been my cage. Now it was my reply. He would learn to hear it. I turned back to the shelf, adjusting the books, arranging them not by color or size, but by memory. My silence told him everything. I did not need his apology. I did not need his explanation. I had chosen peace, and it was mine to keep. The ceramic chimes outside stirred in the breeze, their gentle song drifting into the room. Nathan glanced toward the sound, then back at me. His lips pressed into a thin line. He nodded once, as if he understood. "I'll let you settle in," he said finally. He walked to the door, hesitated, then added, "If you need anything." I met his gaze, calm and steady. He left the sentence unfinished. Some offers are better left that way. He opened the blue door, stepped outside, and closed it behind him. I stood in the quiet cottage, the chimes echoing softly through the open window. I touched the chipped cup on the counter, the one that had followed me through everything, and raised it in both hands. I drank slowly, letting the warmth anchor me in this place, in this new life. For the first time in years, I was not waiting for anyone to see me. I was not hoping to be thanked. I was not shrinking to fit inside someone else's plan. The cottage did not ask me to disappear. It asked only that I live, and so I did. In the small cottage by the lake, I keep a notebook on the kitchen table. Morning light finds it easily slipping over the mug rings and the soft scratches from years of use. I write after tea when the air is clear and the world has not asked anything from me yet. The words come slower than they used to, but they come. I tell the page what the villa tried to make me forget. That a woman's worth is not measured by how quietly she takes up space. I note small victories. I list what stays my breath, my backbone, my name in my own hand. Today I write a sentence I wish someone had given me years ago. You are not something old to discard. You are the foundation that once held up an entire house. I dot the period and feel the line steady me like a hand at my back. The cottage does not argue. The wind slips through the citrus leaves and the chime at the door answers softly. I think of the forged signature so smooth it looked machine-made, and of my own signature beside it imperfect in the way the living always are. I whisper the truth that carried me across the threshold. I only took back the truth. In the evenings, I sit on the porch with my chipped teacup, the lake taking small breaths against the bank. The ceramic wind chime sings its uneven song. Some notes arrive, bright. Some hesitate, all of them honest. I let the steam warm my face. I let my shoulders drop. Healing does not announce itself with drums. It moves like water shaping itself to a new shore. I remember the villa's glittering stillness, how my footsteps felt like trespass. Here the floor creaks and no one apologizes. Here the air smells of oranges and rain. I am alone and I am not lonely. Sometimes I think about forgiveness and how easily we confuse it with surrender. I will not carry bitterness. It weighs too much and feeds on time. But I will carry boundaries. They are light, and they keep the heart from drifting. My silence now is not a cage. It is an instrument tuned to a clear note. When Nathan stopped at the blue door and said I seemed peaceful, I let the wind answer for me. There are apologies that cannot build what their choices tore down. There are payments that cannot balance what was taken. And yet I wish him well. I wish Elena wisdom enough to choose warmth over control. This afternoon, I open the notebook again and write a final reminder to myself. You are not something old to discard. You are the foundation that once held up an entire house. I underline it once, then close the cover with both hands. Outside the window, the lake brightens as the clouds move. The chime gives a small answer. I step onto the porch and sit in the wooden chair that faces the water. The cup in my hands is warm. The crack along its side shines like a healed scar. I breathe, and the breath belongs only to me. Whatever anyone calls this ending, I know its true name. It is not revenge. It is repair. I only took back the truth. Before we say goodbye, I would love to know something. If you have ever been turned into a silent debt, would you stay silent? Tell me where you are listening from. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you and remember that sometimes the miracle does not knock on your door. It waits quietly until you are ready to open your heart. Take care, and we will see you in the next story. I set the notebook aside and step back into the evening light. The porch welcomes me like a friend who never asks for explanations. I sit with the chipped cup warming my fingers. The wind chime answers the breeze with a gentle ring. Somewhere across the lake, a bird lifts into the fading sky. I smile small and steady. I am here. I am whole. The truth sits beside me, quiet and complete. The chime answers.